So Isaiah is prophesying between 740 and about 680. Okay. So he's prophesying, and he's got two objects in focus: the northern kingdom that's about to be conquered and exiled in 20 years. Okay, very short time frame. So Assyria is going to come down into the northern kingdom and conquer them by 722 BC. All right, but he's going to use that to encourage the southern kingdom to repent, to turn away from their sins. If they don't, the same thing's going to happen to them, not by Assyria, but by another kingdom, and that would be Babylon. Okay, so now I readily admit that some of the passages that we're going to look at, it's kind of difficult to know, is he speaking about, the present situation in Israel, or is he, looking to the future, way into the future? Because they're so similar, you can almost make them fit either one. And that's not unusual, because you see the same thing happening in Matthew, in the New Testament. Matthew 10 is a good example. Matthew 10, 16 to, no, I don't know, 34. Hey, those passages could be, taken either at the present day when he sends them out to witness, or to the future, because in Matthew 24, you almost have exactly the same thing said. All right, so my point is that it's hard to decide at times. I'm taking all of chapter 2, 3, and 4 to be futuristic. Okay, when I say that, there's a caveat. He's going to drop back and say, now I'm going to bring judgment on you right now. Well, that's obviously talking about, the present day situation. But when he's talking about deliverance and a new kingdom, and a new king coming in, that's all future. So in 2:1 to 4, look at your outline, the blessings of messianic rule. This is in the distant future, in the last days. You see that in chapter 2, verse 2. Now it will come about in the last days. Okay. You're going to see some phrases that are very similar. You've got in the last days, and then you're going to have the phrase in that day. Okay. In that day isn't as specific as in the last days. So it creates a little problem for us. But here in 2:1 and 2:2, we're talking about the distant future, the blessings of messianic rule. Jerusalem on Mount Moriah will be exalted in that day. Now, guys, think about the change that's gonna be. Right now, there's no Jewish person allowed on Mount Moriah, where the old temple had stood. No Jew can go up there. And yet in this age, it's going to be the Jewish temple is going to be up there, and the Jews are going to own the whole city and not just bits and pieces of it. Look at verses 2 and 3. All nations will worship God there. All nations. Verse 2 says that, and several times in the verses after that. All nations will worship God in Jerusalem, on Mount Moriah. Diversity of religion comes to an end. Now, question. Does universal worship require complete conformity in worship?
No.
That's something really big to keep in your mind. So we can all be right, in a sense. We're all doing the right thing, but boy, we're doing it very differently. That should make you think about the whole idea of conversion today. Do we really need to convert people today? No, they need to believe in Jesus. Okay. I, I know I'm a heretic, but let it be known that I tell everybody around the world, you know what? I don't want you to become a Christian. No, Christians are part of the problem. What I want you to do is fall in love with Jesus. I just want you to follow Jesus. I want you to receive the life that he has for you and follow him. Okay. We've got so many layers of religion on top of Jesus that, it's not worth having people come to, come to the Christian faith. So universal worship of the true and living God in Jerusalem. All will seek to learn God's ways from the God man himself. Notice he's going to be teaching. God's going to teach. Well, nobody's seen God, so I have to suspect that this time, before this world ends, we have a new age come. That new age, the teacher there is the Messiah. So you need to look at verse 3. Apparently, Jesus is called both Lord and God in verse 3. That's significant. So if you want a good passage, we got plenty in the New Testament, but that's one here in the Old Testament. That the king who's going to rule in the kingdom that was offered, that was first of all rejected, but will be received later. That king is both Lord and God. He's the God man.
Which verse are you reading?
I am reading verse 3. And many peoples will come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he, this God, this Lord, will teach us. Okay? He will judge between the nations. This is the activity of the Messiah. He's going to be the ruler. He's going to rule in righteousness. And while there will be sin, there won't be organized corruption. No such thing in the millennial kingdom. All that will be gone because Jesus will be judging it as it comes up.
Hey, Dale, also during this time, I think Brett has pointed this out before, the deceiver is bound, right? He's
That's
not
right.
allowed to roam the earth.
That's right. And I take it that when he's bound, all of the angels that followed him must be bound as well. Okay, so it's going to be like a pre New Testament time. You didn't really hear a bunch about demons and Satan in the Old Testament outside the book of Job. Okay, right? They just don't have a lot of that. Basically, you're dealing with life. I think you're going to come back to that in the millennial kingdom because Satan will be bound. But the people that enter will enter the kingdom in their mortal bodies, and therefore they will have that indwelling sin. And then when they procreate, all the babies will once they sin, they'll have indwelling sin. Okay? I know that that's different. What you've been taught is that everybody is born with indwelling sin. You're born totally depraved, etc., etc. I was taught that. I believe that. I don't any longer believe that. And by the way, someone sent to me an article or a blog article. If you haven't seen it, you need to see this by Bob Wilkin, who's the president and founder of the Grace Evangelical Society. He has come out and now he's declaring that he is a 0-point Calvinist. I reminded him that Dr. Rodmacher had said that 10 years before he died. He came to that conclusion, and we both came to that conclusion together. So that means you got a lot of reteaching yourself about all these passages that have been taken to prove total depravity. If you think it through, they won't do that. Okay? So In verses 3 and 4, we've got God will rule over all the nations, not just Israel. And he's going to be there personally ruling in Jerusalem, where the throne is. Okay, the throne of all the kings of Israel have always been in Jerusalem. Okay, not the divided kingdom in the northern, but of Judah, it's always been in Jerusalem. So the Messiah will have David's throne, and David's throne was always in Jerusalem. So if you want a good reference, that's Psalm 122, verses 1 to 6, I think, will tell you that all the kings rule from Jerusalem. So universal worship of the one true God will be taking place. All will discover that the God of Israel is their God too. Remember, no one gets into the kingdom who's not righteous. What kind of righteousness are we talking about? Well, they basically have done two things. They've loved God according to the revelation that God gave them. He hasn't given the same revelation to everybody. So everybody who has loved God based upon the revelation that he's received and loved his neighbors gets into the kingdom. Had a good time with my younger Indian group on Tuesday. Not this week, but last week. I asked them, what are the conditions for getting into the kingdom? And you know what they said. Yeah, believe in Jesus. Be forgiven of your sins. Get in the kingdom. I said, no, that's not going to work. Because you can't give me a passage. So I took them over to Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 28, which Jesus is teaching. And he says, you got to do two things. If you want to get into this kingdom, if you want to inherit eternal life, that is, the kingdom is coming, you got to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So all will discover that the God of Israel is their God too. Okay, that is the righteous, the ones who have made it into the kingdom. So notice that on October 7th, 2023, we have a demonstration that the world has not reached this glorious future yet. Because, let's read verse 4. Read verse 4. And he will judge between the nations. He will render decisions for many people. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not rise up against, nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. Well, guess what? We're still at war. So this kingdom hasn't come. So if you think that you've made it into the kingdom, no, sorry, you haven't. There is no kingdom to get into right now. There's just a relationship with a true and living God. And if you don't want that, I'm sorry, there's nothing else left. You can have that, and it's life-changing. It's totally fulfilling. It's a fantastic, unusual, unbelievable relationship, okay, of answers to prayer, constant deliverances by the hand of the true and living God. But if you don't want that, there's nothing else that he's offering today. He's not offering you heaven. Okay? He's not warning you about hell. He's just saying that you want to walk with me? You can walk with me. And I can be your God, and you will be my people if you walk with me. If you don't walk with me, then you are no longer my people. Well, does that mean you're saved and unsaved? No, it has nothing to do with salvation. Totally misunderstood the word salvation. Okay. Any questions about Isaiah 2, 1 to 4?
that designate a millennial kingdom, a 1,000-year kingdom?
The most significant one that actually says 1,000 years is Revelation 21-7. I think in those 7 verses, it's 6 times it says that this kingdom will be for 1,000 years. But the previous chapters break that time frame down, and you've got for the 7 years that leads up to the 1,000 years, it talks about it in months and in days. Okay, so we know that when he talks about 1,000 years and 20, he's talking about literal years. He's talking about a literal time frame. Okay, can't spiritualize it. And so, if you ask, oh, we're already in the kingdom today. Oh, really? Jesus is ruling? Look out there. Look out your window. He needs help. It's not going well. Okay. So, everybody got that? No questions? I'm trying to set you up. You know that. So if you have any anxiety, now's the time to speak it. Okay. Now, who has Micah 4, 1-4? That you could read that. Now, stay in Isaiah 2.
I got it.
Okay, please.
All 4 verses.
Yeah, please.
In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established. As the highest of the mountains, it will be exalted above the hills, and peoples, plural, will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken."
That sound like Isaiah chapter 2, 1-4?
A little bit.
Yeah, if you were to compare those on a sheet of paper, you'd be astounded. I mean, somebody's, plagiarizing someone. Someone's looking over someone's shoulder. It's almost identical. Now, remember, Micah, the prophet Micah and the prophet Isaiah were contemporaries. They were prophets of God preaching at the same time. Okay? So they're both describing what?
The kingdom.
Okay? Remember, there are no unrighteous people that get in the kingdom. 0. There's no wickedness. There's no evil. There are no stumbling blocks in that kingdom. Okay? Now, what you going to do with verse 5 of Micah chapter 4?
You didn't tell us to read verse 5.
I know, intentionally. So someone read that out slowly.
All the nations may walk in the name of their gods, but we will walk in the name of the Lord, our God, forever and ever.
Oh. Now, who's in this kingdom?
The righteous.
Only the righteous, only those who have a relationship with a true and living God. You got some nations going to call him by one name. You got some nations going to call him by a different name. Guys, that seems as clear as you can make it if you're open to it. Okay? And by the way, you've got biblical examples of that taking place, right? You can go back to Abraham and Abimelech in Genesis 20. Abimelech only refers to God by Adonai. Well, the problem we already know when we're reading Genesis 1-19 that Adonai is a name of God. But if you didn't have that and you only had the meeting of Abimelech, King Abimelech with Abraham, your interest would be piqued seeing that Abimelech called God Adonai, but Abraham always called God Elohim in the meeting together with them. And yet they found out, oh, we're talking about the same God. Cool. Okay. We're talking about the same God. So, what happens when God raises up Moses and Aaron to go to Egypt to bring the people out? They go in what name? They go in a name that God has never revealed himself. He's never called himself Yahweh. And so, how would you like to go to rescue a nation? He said, oh, by the way, Yahweh sent me. And they say, who? We don't know any Yahweh. Now, we know Adonai, we know Elohim, we know all kinds of names we know, but Yahweh, we don't know a Yahweh. And so, that's why Moses has 3 miracles. You know, the staff with a snake in the hand and, you know, all the things to convince them that their God, who they need to know now by the name Yahweh, has sent them. So this isn't unusual. God has revealed himself at different times to different people differently. It was his choice. Any questions? Why don't you share with them how Leanne answered this, Brett?
I will. My wife, who is so much wiser than me, I give her your question this morning and she goes, oh, that just reminds me of The Last Battle, C.S. Lewis. And I said, really? And she goes, yeah, let me read it to you. And she's got her book. And so I'm going to read this to you guys. You'll appreciate it. It's near the end of the book and it's about, it'll take me a minute or so to read it. But the context is there's this warrior who is opposing Aslan and he wants to fight Aslan and he's the great warrior. But at this point, Aslan is in the city and he has to meet him. So they go in as merchants without their gear. And he says, then I fell at his feet and thought, surely this is the hour of death, for the lion, who is worthy of all honor, will know that I have served Tash and not him all the days of my life. Nevertheless, it is better to see the lion and die than to be Tisroc of the world and live and not to have seen him. But the glorious one bent down his golden head and touched my forehead with his tongue and said, son, thou art welcome. But I said, alas, Lord, I am no son of thine, but the servant of Tash. He answered, child, all the service thou hast done to Tash, I account as service done to me. Then, by reasons of my great desire for wisdom and understanding, I overcame my fear and questioned the glorious one and said, Lord, is it then true, as the ape said, that thou and Tash are one? The lion growled so that the earth shook, but his wrath was not against me, and said, it is false, not because he and I are one, but because we are opposites. I take to me the service which thou hast done to him. For I and he are of such different kinds that no service which is vile can be done to me, and none which is not vile can be done to him. Therefore, if any man swear by Tash and keep his oath for the oath's sake, it is by me that he is truly sworn, though he know it not. And it is I who reward him. And if any man do a cruelty in my name, then, though he says the name Aslan, it is Tash whom he serves, and not by Tash his deed is accepted. Dost thou understand, child? I said, Lord, thou knowest how much I understand. But I said also, for the truth constrained me, yet I have been seeking Tash all my days. Beloved, said the glorious one, unless thy desire had been for me, thou wouldst not have sought so long and so truly, for all find what they truly seek. C.S. Lewis.
The point, guys, isn't the name that's used, it's the character, and the will of the person behind the name. If that's holy, righteous, good, okay, that's the one, the true and living God. If it's messed up, okay, that's not the true and living God. So it's all about the character of the deity. Okay, not the name, because there are going to be different names that people have called a deity that has the same character or parts of the same character. Okay, so we are no different in Christianity. You've got Christians that only know God as a God of love and not a God of justice. You got people who know him as a God of wrath and not a God of compassion. And what we need to understand is his true character is all of that and not bits and pieces. But that's the process where people learn that. You don't just get born into the world understanding that God is this kind of God. It's something that has to be learned, and you learn it from his word. Okay? All right. You pass the test. You get to proceed. Yeah, Jim?
The millennial kingdom has a start point, right? A definite start. And all the people that enter the millennial kingdom are only the righteous people, correct? Two-part question. I mean, I sort of float between doing what's right and doing what's wrong. You know, how do I know I'm righteous enough to get into the millennial kingdom? Second part of the question is people who are not killed in the tribulation, who are not righteous are taken away. But the people who are in the millennial kingdom have progeny who sin, who are not righteous, correct? So
Correct.
there are a lot of not righteous people in the millennial kingdom. And of course, at the end of the millennial kingdom, they get on Satan's side, right? And try to fight against God, bad decision. So how does all that wrap into what you're saying about, everybody is wonderful and righteous in the millennial kingdom?
First of all, you're going to see here in Isaiah 1-4, you're going to see that he's going to tell us that Israel has got to be all righteous to be ruled by the king. Okay, so when they come back and they're established, God established, they're going to all be righteous. All of their names will be written in the book of life. Okay, you're going to see that in the chapters that precede. Also, Jesus says what? Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. Not everyone is, well, that's verse 7. I'm sorry. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. You got to be righteous. Now, notice it doesn't say perfect. This whole idea of perfection, that's not God's standard. He wants righteousness. The reason that you know he's not seeking perfection is because he gave us lots of ways to deal with sin. You can confess it, you can pray about it, you can repent, you can do all sorts of things. In the Old Testament, you could offer a sacrifice to take care of the sin. So God has given a lot of different ways to take care of it when it happens. What he's looking for is someone pointed in the right direction, who's following him, even though he falls, even though he sins. Remember what the book of Proverbs says. Even if a man falls 6, yea, 7 times, okay, a righteous man does that. So the point is, it's not perfection that he's looking for. It's someone who is, hey, I'm loving God. How do you love God? John 14:21.
Keep his commandments.
Yes. How do you love my neighbor? The same way. I love God by keeping the commandments that he's given me for my relationship to him. I love my neighbor and keeping the commandments that he's given me for my relationship to other men. Okay. So And do you ever blow it? Every day. That's why 1 John 1:9, that's one verse I know by heart. I don't need to think about. You know it by heart because you use it all the time. Okay. So, guys, all I'm saying is, Jim, so you're right. Everybody has to be righteous to get in, and there is a level. How do you know if you've made the level? You know what? Why focus on that? So many people want to see how close to the edge of the cliff that they can walk and not fall off. That's a bad decision. Okay, it's like growing up in the country. We used to talk about the guy with the pickup truck with the bed down, and you would sit back with your feet dangling down on the bumpy dirt road. Not a good place to be. You hit the right bump, you're going to bump you right off into the road. You get all the way up into the cab to the back and hold on to the back of the cab. That's where you need to be. So if you want to play the game, hey, there are consequences. Okay. So notice there's nothing you can do to go to heaven. There's nothing you can believe that's going to get you to heaven. You have to be righteous to get into the kingdom. Righteousness is obeying God. Nobody obeys perfectly. That's why we've got how to deal with sin. So the people that get in and then procreate, okay, they don't become pagans in the sense that they're trash, that they're as bad as they can be, kind of thing. You've got the King of Kings ruling, and he's ruling with discipline. Okay, that doesn't mean you don't sin. It doesn't mean that you might have a cold heart eventually. Okay, yes, over 1,000 years, you're going to have generations that have that. Remember that during this time, a baby, a young person, if he dies before the age of 100, well, people are gonna think, well, that must have been something going on in his life because he died way too early. And if an old man, now you look at me, doesn't live out all of his days, something's going on in his life. So the lifetime is going to be extraordinary in the kingdom. Okay? Going to live a long, long time. It should remind you of the ages before the flood. You had people living almost 1,000 years before the flood. Well, that's going to come back. You're going to have people living hundreds of years. So you can imagine how the procreation is going to take place. Okay? And all those Muslims are going to trying to die to have their virgins, to have all the children they want. You're not going to need that if you're going to live 300 years or 500 years. You're going to have a happy life down here. So you are going to have Satan loose, going to deceive people, the people that God has permitted to stay there in sin. Now, this is something I'm not going to be very good at. Guys, the unpardonable sin, in what ages does the unpardonable sin function? It functions in the time of Jesus when he walked upon the earth and in the age to come. So you're going to actually have people that are procreated, and they're going to come up, and they're not going to buy into Jesus ruling. They're not going to want him to rule. Those are the ultimate people, okay? But they won't be outwardly corrupt because Jesus is going to take care of that. So inwardly, they can reject his rule, and that's the unpardonable sin. So they're going to be thrown out. Some people are going to be killed. Some people are going to be thrown out of the kingdom. Those that remain will be taken care of after they rebel. So, aren't you glad you sat through that so I could completely confuse you?
It doesn't really confuse me. I mean, it compares to what happened before the earth was created between Satan and the fallen angels and God. That's the same thing's happening again. So why does that surprise you?
It's my intellect. I'm very easily surprised. Now he's going to go into why the judgment is coming. Remember, chapter 1 was, you guys have walked away from me. You guys have done really bad stuff. Okay. And then in 2:1-4, he said, hey, but there is going to be a better day coming. Now he's going to come back and say, but even though there's a better day coming, you're going to pay for your sin today. Okay. So Judah's idolatry is going to be judged. That's verses 5-22. And this seems to be speaking of the near future, not the last days. God has abandoned Judah for judgment, 5 and 6. When they abandon their faith, God abandons them. That's a good principle, guys. Don't keep asking God to bless you if you're totally indifferent, rebellious, or hardened to his will. That's hypocrisy, and he's not going to buy into it. I think God hates hypocrisy. That's what Paul tells us in Galatians 2:11-17. So the reason that they have fallen into sin, this is also significant for us because they've been influenced by other cultures. Not every culture is equally admirable, is equally righteous, is equally good. You get that from Scripture. So what did they pick up? He lists some things in verses 6, 7, and 8. You got soothsayers, that's fortune tellers, like the Philistines. Intermarriages, okay? You remember what happened to the people that intermarried when they returned from exile in Nehemiah? What happened to those guys? What did God require any Jewish man who married a Gentile wife and had children? Anybody?
Didn't they have to get rid of them?
God commanded them to divorce their wives. So, and not only that, the people that did divorce their wives, their names are written in the book of Nehemiah. Go back and check it. That's kind of, whoa, God is serious. So intermarry, the reason that he commanded not to intermarry is because, we are so weak. We let these gorgeous women lead us astray. So who was Ahaz's wife? It's Jezebel. Okay, what did she bring in? All kinds of idol worship, all kinds. Remember, she's the one that had the 450 prophets of Baal that Elijah ends up chopping up. Remember that? 1 Kings chapter 18. Okay. So intermarrying causes the same problems. What happened to Solomon? There's a guy that, I need to think through. I could probably be a stand-up comedian talking about Solomon. Anybody that needs, what was it? Let me think now. I get the numbers mixed up. Either 700 concubines and 300 wives, or 300 wives and 700 concubines. That's a guy that, you know what? He has a hormone problem. So here you've got intermarriages led him astray, but because he was David's son, David didn't take the kingdom away from him until he died. And so when he died, the kingdom was given to Rehoboam, and it didn't take long before they divided. Jeroboam to the north, Rehoboam to the south. So intermarriages were forbidden by God. Okay. That's
And
something.
the intermarriage you're referring to is between Jews and not Jews.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so trying to keep the faith that has been delivered to the Jewish people intact. That's why they had eating laws. That's why they had intermarriage laws. We're just trying to keep the revelation that God's given us intact. See, that's why they were chosen. They were chosen for that task. Okay? So then other things that came up was greed, covetousness, materialism. Sometimes they depended upon military strength rather than God. Boy, that'd be easy to do, wouldn't it? If you're one of the greatest military nations at the time, it's easy to think that your swords and your chariots would deliver you rather than God. And then in chapter 2, verse 8, idolatry. Those were the influences that they had assimilated, and the means by which bad influences were assimilated, so that God is going to bring judgment. Verse 9, everyone has fallen morally and spiritually. So once again, make a note in your Bible or on your notepad that apostasy is possible for the so-called believer, the so-called son of God. Remember, that's the phrase that was used in chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. God was complaining that his sons were leaving, were apostatizing. Okay. Here you have it again in chapter 2, verse 9. So judgment is prophesied. Judgment. And the interesting thing is, if you compare the judgment in verse 10 and verses 19 and 21, you're going to see it. Boy, that really sounds like, looks like the book of Revelation. Same type of tribulation, except, hey, the tribulation that's coming in the future will be the greatest that the world has ever known. This is going to be a great tribulation for Israel, but the other tribulation is worldwide. The proud to be humbled. God will not forgive Israel until they're humbled before him. By the way, just FYI, Matthew 18, 1 to 3, Jesus tells the apostles, now we're a good year and a half into the ministry where they followed him, okay? And he says, unless you guys humble yourselves and become like this child that he set in front of them, he said, you're not going to enter the kingdom. Notice that means that they weren't already in the kingdom, because he's talking about them entering the kingdom in the future. And humility is one of the characteristics that's going to be needed to enter the kingdom. That's part of the righteousness. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 and 7 says, God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Okay? So here, verse 22, he says, stop regarding man whose breath of life is in his nostrils. In other words, he's a wimp. He's only going to live so long. Why should you esteem man or mankind? He's going to be here today and gone tomorrow. So idolatry is going to finally vanish after God judges the kingdom, the northern kingdom, okay? And if he has to do it to the southern kingdom, it will vanish there as well. It's been said that when Israel, the southern kingdom now, I mean Judah, comes back from the Babylonian captivity, idolatry was never an issue again. Okay? So chapter 3, judgment will come upon all classes of people. So when God brings judgment, he's going to bring it to their leaders, to their children, to the women, everybody in the nation. Now look at verses 8 to 15. Jerusalem's spiritual state leads to military defeat. Now this is just simply the second time he's saying that. When they abandon faith, God abandons them. So their spiritual state will lead to military defeat, guys. We have grown so spiritually lukewarm that if I didn't believe in the rapture, I'd believe that we will be taken over. But praise God for the rapture. Okay? So they rejected God, verse 8, they rejected God in word and deed. So God ceases to protect those who speak dishonorably about him. Have you noticed or watched any of the videos on YouTube about the college students and these protests speaking about religion per se? It's abominable. So verse 9, not only did they reject God, they openly sinned. There's no shame anymore. Okay? That's why you can call a witness who's basically a prostitute. Okay? There's no shame. Open sinfulness causes God to step back. God calls this bringing judgment upon oneself. When God allows judgment to come because of sinfulness, you did it to yourself. Okay? And then thirdly, God removes his protection. So notice the steps here. First of all, they rejected God and his word. Then they openly sinned, and God removed the protection. Verse 9 says they brought evil on themselves. So God's going to judge the women. That's chapter 4. At least the first couple of verses. The women along with the leaders and the men. Okay? In verse 12, chapter 3, verse 12, these are guidance counselors. These are people who were giving counsel, spiritual counsel to others. Guidance counselors can lead one astray. They are as proud as men, verse 16. They'll be deprived of their luxuries, and they'll be deprived of their men because their men will be crushed in battle. That's what's happening now with so many of the ideas. We've got feminism that's driven away men. Now the women are saying, why won't the men date us? You're not dateable anymore. You've driven them away. You become something that the men don't want. You are your own worst enemy. Now, chapter 4, we're going to probably have to end with verses 2 to 6. In chapter 4, the branch. Who is the branch? Be careful. It's like many words in the Bible. The branch may have a different referent than what you're going to see in chapter 11. So the movement may be in the last days when Messiah rose. If he's now talking in 4:2 of the last days, then we're talking about the king, the Messianic king, Jesus in his return. But if he's back now to, he just got through talking about the reason that they're going to be judged because of these sins. If he's still in the present time in his day, then the branch here is not Messiah, it's Israel. It's kind of difficult to decide which it is. So it may be the coming judgment on Judah. They're the branch, and the branch is going to be judged. Okay? Or if it's in the future, the far future, It's going to be Jesus. Let me give you some reference points. The branch in Isaiah 11 is definitely the coming Messiah. But here it looks like it's Israel. Lion, the Lion of Judah, or the crucified lamb, Revelation 5:5, that's Messiah. In 1 Peter 5:8, the lion is Satan. The bride in John 3 is Israel. In Revelation 19:8, it's all the overcomers. Now notice I never said church. Make a note. Okay? The vineyard. The vineyard in chapter 5, that next chapter that we're going to look at next week, is Israel. But the vine in the vineyard, or the vine that fills the land, the vineyard, is Christ in John 15. So each word can have different meanings depending upon the context. So all the survivors, look at verse 3, will be holy. Their names will be written in the book of life. That sort of tells me right there that we're talking about contemporary times with Isaiah, because the book of life deals with the future. So they're going to write their names now in the book of life so they can participate in the future whenever it comes. Okay? All will be blessed, and all will bless the righteous. Notice verse 3, discipline was for the purpose of spiritual cleansing, just like what's going to happen in the Great Tribulation. I'm making a note of that. I'm bringing that out because I'm suggesting to you, if that's how God uses discipline in this life, that's how he's going to use discipline in the afterlife, for cleansing, to make us into who we need to be. So God, when they return to the land after their captivity and exile, God will once again dwell in their midst. And next week, we'll look at Israel being the vineyard.